Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Raya and the Last Dragon. Let's talk about it. So Raya and the Last Dragon centers around the fictional world of Kamandra, where dragons and humans used to live together in harmony. However, when sinister monsters known as the Droon threatened the land, the dragons sacrificed themselves in order to save humanity. But now, 500 years later, those same monsters have returned, and it's up to the lone warrior known as Raya to track the last dragon down and stop the Droon for good. Now, before we even dive into my thoughts on this film specifically, I did want to quickly touch on the release strategy that was used for this film, that of course being the Premier Access model that Disney utilized for the first time for Mulan. Now, because we're dealing with these unprecedented times where a lot of cinemas around the world are currently closed, and those that are open, people still are wary of going to the cinema right now because of the pandemic, because of the whole pandemic that's still happening. Disney did decide to employ this new strategy where they would put their new releases on Disney Plus, but for the additional fee of $29.99 or £90.99. Now, this has been met with some mixed reactions, Many think that the price tag is too high for a film, especially when you're going to be watching it at home, but some do still think that it is a reasonable price, considering that to go to the cinema, especially as a family, you would be spending quite a bit more money. I did discuss this in my recent Disney Plus kind of evaluation video, so if you'd like to check those out, then they're in a playlist on my channel, so you can go ahead and do so. But I do think that it is quite a hefty price tag to ask people to pay for a single film, especially when you're already required to pay for Disney Plus to begin with as a streaming service, and on top of that you have to pay for the film specifically. I think that the film should realistically be like $20 and £10, but hey, I'm not the Disney exec, so I can't really tell them what to do with their property. But I do think as a result of the Premier Access model, we have seen quite a bit less hype surrounding Raya and the Last Dragon. I don't think it's been met with a lot of enthusiasm as much as the other Disney animation classic releases that we've seen, especially if you consider, the Frozen franchise, which recently has come out, right out the gate just being incredibly successful. I don't think that Raya and the Last Dragon has been met with such enthusiasm. And I think that's a really great shame, because this is yet another example of Disney delving into, different cultures and different cultural representation that it has in the past. Here we have the representation of Southeastern culture, where even though we're dealing with a fictional land of Kamandra, we do see inspirations from countries like Vietnam and Malaysia and Myanmar and so on and so forth. So I do think that is commendable to see Disney try to delve into the representation of these countries that are seldom represented in cinema, especially in Hollywood, because oftentimes when we think of Asian representation, we don't think of countries like Indonesia or Vietnam. We tend to think of China, Japan and India. And on top of this, it's not lost on me that a lot of the films that Disney was going to come out with that were negatively impacted by the pandemic were films that were supposed to be shining a spotlight on underrepresented characters. For example, we have a lot of POC main characters in these films, like Mulan, as I mentioned, and Soul from Pixar, and also Raya and the Last Dragon, Shang-Chi over at Marvel. The Eternals also has quite a bit of representation in terms of people of color in that cast. And then of course we have a lot of female representation going straight to Disney Plus as of yet, like Mulan and Raya and the Last Dragon, and presumably Black Widow, although we'll see what happens to that film ultimately. I presume that it will have a dual release strategy where it will be made available to see in cinemas, in select cinemas that are open right now, and it will drop on Disney Plus for Premier Access. But again, we'll see what happens there. And that's likely also to be the case for Cruella, which is yet another example of a female lead character. But with all of that being said, now let's talk about Raya and the Last Dragon itself. As I mentioned, I did enjoy the exploration of this different culture culture that is yet to be explored in the Disney animated classics pantheon. I think it's great to see a bit more diversity in Asian representation. I often talk about this in relation to Black representation in film, but it's great to see the diversity of representation that we're getting across the board from all different backgrounds, and especially when you're diving into, you know, different Asian cultures and different Asian countries. I think you're going to start to see the variety and the breadth of the different types of cultures that are found in this huge continent, and I think it's great to expose Western audiences to such representation. But speaking of variety, one thing that I was especially excited about going into this film after seeing the trailer was exploring the different lands that exist in the land that was formerly known as Kamandra. Now, all of these lands are named after different parts of a dragon. So you have spine, you have tail, you have heart, and I expected to see a little bit more variety and really great world building when it comes to the exploration of these different lands that used to make up Kamandra. But unfortunately, I was kind of disappointed. I feel like they missed the mark there when it comes to really expanding upon each of these worlds. I would have liked to see them really delve into it a little bit more in the way that they were able to in Zootopia, for example. And that's another case where you have a film that explores a land that is incredibly diverse in the kinds of habitats, in the kinds of ecological environments that it has. And I think Zootopia very much, you know, took it to 100 when it comes to world building on that front, whereas I think Raya and the Last Dragon could have used to really delve into those different lands a little bit more so that they could feel distinct and unique in their cultures and their practices. Okay, since we've already talked about the land of Kamandra, let's dive into the character of Raya herself, because she is our main female protagonist here, and apparently, according to the small amount of research that I did, she was based off of the character of Peter Quill from the MCU, which is fascinating. I do think that her red cape may be an ode to that, which is nice. And speaking of her red cape, I do think that the way that the character is animated is really beautiful, especially that red cape and hat combo. I think she has a striking figure, especially when she's just standing there with the wind blowing. She looks so cool. She looks like a warrior. She looks like someone that you don't want to mess with, okay? And I appreciate that about the character design, because they certainly don't sacrifice any of the traditionally feminine aspects of the character, but they still make her quite menacing. They still make her someone to kind of take seriously as a warrior. And in terms of her voice and the way that she's portrayed vocally, I would say that Kelly Marie Tran does a great job voicing this character. I would say that at the beginning of the film, when she's much younger, I'm not quite sure if Kelly Marie Tran does the voice work at that point, but that didn't quite mesh with me. That didn't quite gel with me. She sounded a little too old to have that voice, but I do think that when she becomes the older character that we know of, the voice itself completely matches the character, and I think the vocal performance is excellent on that front. I would say if there was another criticism that I would point to, it would be that I wasn't the biggest fan, actually. I wasn't the biggest fan of Aquafina as Sisu, okay? I feel like Aquafina has a very distinctive voice that didn't quite mesh with the ethereal, the kind of pastel representation of this life dragon. I feel like Aquafina's voice is almost like gruff, it's almost raspy, and I feel like the kind of dragon that was depicted there, like she's almost like a fairy dragon, like she's a very, you know, light pastel airy dragon, and I feel like perhaps they were trying to, you know, draw a juxtaposition between the two in terms of her voice and her depiction visually, but I didn't feel like it meshed very well. Other than that, I think Gemma Chan does a great job as Namari, and Alan Tudyk, I guess, is present as Tuk Tuk. Like, I don't know why we needed to get Alan Tudyk to be Tuk Tuk, but fine, like, give him the paycheck, I guess, because, you know, he's good in it. Now, in terms of the themes that are explored in this film, it is very heavy and intentional in its messaging that, you know, us being divided and us being separated as a people will only lead to our downfall, okay? This film very much emphasizes the importance of unity, of bringing people together, and how greed and untrustworthiness will lead to our demise because we will divide ourselves and it will make us weaker as a result. Like, that is the overall message of the film, and I do think that it's conveyed very well, especially through the different factions that used to make up Kamandra. Again, I do wish that we would have explored the cultures of of each of these factions a little bit more, besides just their color palettes being quite distinct, although I do appreciate that as well as someone who is very color minded. But I do think that the overall message was very well conveyed, if, you know, a little bit heavy-handedly conveyed. And for the most part, I do think that the allegory of these monsters who attack the vulnerable factions when they're alone does work in order to illustrate the message that the film is going for. But speaking of the monsters themselves, this film does follow a recent trend that we have seen in Disney animated classics recently, in it not really having a villain, not really committing to having a proper traditional Disney animated classic villain in it. Okay, this time around, the real villain, okay, the real bad guy is the concept of division, is the concept of selfishness and, you know, every man for themselves, and greed as well. Like, those are the villains. It's very arbitrary concepts that are the villains of the story. There are some antagonistic characters that go through some, you know, pretty compelling character arcs, but in terms of committing to an actual good old-fashioned mustache twirling villain, this film follows the example of a Moana in that it doesn't really have one of those. And I personally feel like that's somewhat of a shame, even though I do understand this general move towards these more complex storylines where these abstract concepts are explored as opposed to the motivations of a single character. Although having said that, I would also like to raise you a Zootopia which is able to do both. Now, on top of this film not having a real traditional Disney villain, it also doesn't have any musical numbers in it. Now, this is a real shame. This is a real shame because I feel like the musical numbers in Disney films go a long way to distinguish them as Disney films, as Walt Disney animations, as opposed to a Pixar film or even a DreamWorks film, which to me a lot of the time this felt like. It felt more like a DreamWorks film to me anyways than it did a traditional Disney animated classic. But even the Disney films that don't have musical numbers within them still have a good featured song that you can at least snap to when the credits roll, but this film doesn't even have that. Even the live action remake of Mulan had a good featured song that was sung by Christina Aguilera, but this song was just weird. Like, it was so forgettable. I couldn't believe this was the song that they wanted to attach to this project. Like, oh, it really was a dud in my opinion. I would also say that another thing that this film kind of falters on are the side characters. Okay, so here's the thing. Here's the thing. The side characters in this film aren't bad, okay? Like, I didn't mind the character of Sisu, although I do think that the way that she was animated when she was human was quite bizarre. And actually, some of the animation when she was a dragon as well was also a little bit dodgy, but mostly from a technical standpoint, because I don't think that her dragon fur meshed well with the water when she was swimming. But traditionally, when it comes to 3D or computer animation, you know, animating water is quite difficult, but it's something that Disney and Pixar have managed to do very, very well as of late. But I do think that there was a little bit of a struggle when it came to animating a wet hair and wet fur in the case of Sisu when she was swimming. And I also think that it was shown with Raya's hair when she got her hair wet. It looked a little bit early 2000s animation on that front, but still I do think that the animation in this film is beautiful overall. I just don't like the way that they portrayed the character of Sisu in her human form. And in terms of the rest of the side characters, whilst they're fun, okay, whilst they're very enjoyable, I didn't find them to be overly memorable. I mean, I enjoyed the little kid. The little boy was really adorable. I was perplexed by the baby. I was perplexed by the baby. I had so many questions about the baby, the safety of the baby, the training of the baby, like who is taking care of this baby? I had so many questions on that front. The monkeys were cute, okay, they're traditional Disney sidekicks, so no issues there, although Abu would definitely give them a run for their money. And whilst we're already on the topic of comparing Disney sidekicks, I mean, Mushu would 100% give Sisu a run for her money as well, but I digress. So overall, I did enjoy Raya and the Last Dragon, but I have to say that it didn't really stand out to me as a Disney animated classic that will stand the test of time. time. For me personally, I feel like whilst the film was enjoyable, it didn't really feel timeless to me. It didn't really have a plot that had me enthralled the entire time. And as I mentioned, I think there were missed opportunities when it came to the world building and really setting up the different clans and the different tribes that existed in that world before they came together to appreciate their differences and what they could accomplish together despite all of them. And so with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Raya and the Last Dragon a 7 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Raya and the Last Dragon, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this film down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to my channel to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!